folks, welcome back to another review by yours truly, Sam Healey, right here on the Dice Tower. I want to first of all say thank you so much to Tom and the crew for giving me the opportunity to do this once again. I certainly appreciate their confidence in me, and I'm super stoked to get back to it. We're going to be talking about The Hunt today. The Hunt is a two-player game that has been put out by 25th Century Games. The designers are Matthias, Kramer, and Engin, Kunter. It takes about 45 minutes to play. Generally speaking, maybe 30 to 45 minutes would be a good window for it. And it has a 2.06 complexity out of 5. So let's get down to the table. We'll take a look at how it plays briefly, and then we'll have some final thoughts at the end. So let's get to it. So as we're down on the table here, I have the game set up for you. Basically, the German player is going to choose where the alt mark begins on the board, and then they will secretly, using a pad and paper that doesn't come in the game, but you will secretly choose where the Admiral Graf Spee will start on the board, and that is hidden throughout the course of the game. You'll also draw 2 freighter tiles and set them out on the ports from which they begin. And they are trying to basically get to Great Britain. You'll also start with Force G right here on space 6 of the board, and then Forces K and H are put in these labeled spots on the board to begin with as well. Basically, these are reinforcements, and you'll have to spend action points to get them out onto the board throughout the course of the game. The game does come with 2 player aids, one for each side of the conflict. You'll also have, the Germans will also have a surveillance plane that they will be able to use as they're to get some extra successes on when they're searching for these different freighters that are on the board. And then they also have the ability to stockpile action points. They can save up to 2 to be used later on in the game. So basically, what you do on your turn is really dependent upon what side of the conflict you're playing. For the British, you'll see here that there are a number of different things that you can do. The first thing, however, you do is you move both of your freighters that are on the board towards the Great Britain port. After you've done that, if there's only one freighter on the board, you'll draw a new freighter from the bag here and place it out there, because there's always supposed to be 2 freighters on the board at any given time. Now, both players start with 5 cards in their hand, but the British player is always able to draw up to 5, but the German player is only able to draw up to 5 if the Admiral Graf Spee is adjacent to the alt mark or in the same space as the alt mark. So, if the German player draws 5 cards in their hands, that does give the British player a little bit of information about where the Admiral Graf Spee might be. But after you have basically moved your freighters, now you can play cards out of your hand, and you're either going to play them for the action points that are listed right here around the middle of the card, or you're going to play it for the event if the card play is in the right phase of the game. When you can play these cards for their event is determined by this little tab right here. This one is a hunt event card, so if we're still in the hunt phase and we haven't moved to the battle phase, then you can play this for either the action points or the event. Down here at the bottom of the card, it denotes that if you play this card from your hand and pay 1 action point, you can get some extra help on your search action, or you can actually cause the German player to have to give you a hint on where the Admiral Graf Spee is using one of these tokens here. And basically, whenever you have to give a hint, you have to show, for example, if on their piece of paper they have the Admiral Graf Spee on the 20 space, then they have to put the hint marker on one of the adjacent spaces or on the space that it actually is. As the German player, you're going to be basically using your cards right off the bat for movement. There isn't a freighter phrase or anything like that for the German player, but much like the British player's hand, you have this similar kind of cards. You have some cards that are used for the hunt event, some that are mandatory events, and then others that are only battle events. And basically what this means is that once we get into the battle phase, this is an event that will be useful for the German player in that battle phase. We'll talk about that in just a few moments, though. What can you use on the action points? Well, action points can be used to move the alt mark or the Admiral Graf Spee around the board. Generally speaking, you don't ever have to use all of your action points for what you have stated. There is a good amount of bluffing that happens in the game, so you should definitely use that and put it to your advantage. Now, some things that you're able to use, first of all, you can search. So if you have the Admiral Graf Spee in an area where there is a freighter, you have to first search for them to see if you find them, because these are roughly 300 to 400 square miles each hex. So just because you know that the Admiral Graf Spee is there and you know that he are in the same space, you don't know exactly where they are, so you have to search for them. So generally what you're going to be doing is you're going to spend 2 action points on the card that you used, and then you're going to roll, and you need to get a 5 or higher. In order to get a 5 or higher, for example, that would not have been a good roll, but let's say that you got this, you could use your plane here, moving it over to the used section, and you get a +2 on your search, which would make this 4, a 5 or higher, and would make it a 6, but that would mean that it is correct. And so if you do that, you would actually reveal that you are there, and you can actually sink this and get it off the board. Later on in the game, after you have already used your airplane, you can spend 1 action point to repair it and get it back up in the air so that you can use it to help out on a future search. Now, a couple of things that you're going to be using your action points for as the British player. You're going to be able to move your forces around from space to space. The reason you're trying to move your forces around the board is you're trying to locate where that Admiral Graf Spee is. So what you could do is, if you think that you're in a spot where the Admiral Graf Spee is, you'll use one of your action points for that turn, and you're going to roll the die and try to find him. And so if you roll, you have to get a 5 or higher, but you do have cards in your hand, as I talked about earlier, that have these intelligence bars on the bottom. And so in this particular case, you probably wouldn't pay this for the intelligence down at the bottom, because it's not going to help you. It's only going to make you a 4, but maybe you want a hint. So we'll say that Force K and Force G do a search action down here in Area 20, and they roll a 6, which means that they absolutely found the Admiral Graf Spee, and this has occurred. Now what's happening here is that Force G and Force K are now going to battle the Graf Spee in a final battle. At that point, each player will draw up to 5 cards, no matter how many cards they have in their hand, and now a 5-step battle is going to occur, where basically each player will play a card from their hand and turn the card over and so forth. All we're basically using is we're using the AP value for determining who wins that phase of the battle. So a 5 to a 3, that's going to be that the British player is going to cause damage to the German player. But the German card here is a battle event, and it says increase the AP value of the next 2 battle cards by 1. So they might lose this one. A damage marker gets put on the Admiral Graf Spee like this, and now we play another card. So now the British player will play this one, and the German player will play this one. So this is a 3, and so this one adds 1 to this, making it a 3. So it's a 3 to a 3. But every single card that the British player plays is able to be boosted by the force power of these military forces that are out here. So Force K is giving the British player a +1, which actually makes this, and it also made this one a 6. But I didn't mention it because it was such an overwhelming victory already. So 3 + 1 is 4. 2 + 1 is 3. So again, the Admiral Graf Spee gets damaged. And this continues until all 5 cards have been played, and then whoever has the most damage over here loses the game. The other 2 ways for this game to end are the German player sinks 5 freighters. If that happens, the game is over, the German player has won. Or if the British player is able to safely guide 5 ships to Great Britain without having them destroyed, then the British player will win. But in my experience, more often than not, you're going to have the final battle determine the winner of the game. So let's get to my final thoughts. So that's that for the hunt. Hopefully you have a basic idea of how the hunt plays. It is a 2-player game, so you can't play it solo. You can't go over 2. It is just for 2 players. But with that having been said, I think that restriction is a good restriction for this kind of game. Having this be a 2-player game, I think, was a great decision to be made, because it gives each person, first of all, their own persona in the game, if that makes any sense. Could it have been a team game? Absolutely, it could have been. But I think making it a 2-player game is really where this game kind of comes into its own, if I can say that. You simply have to find one other person to come enjoy the game with you, and I think that's really where this shines. Conflict games like this tend to overcomplicate themselves, and I don't say that as a detriment so much, but it's just kind of a reality. When you have 2 games that are themed around a war event or some type of battle or something like that, generally speaking, often those rules and the complexities basically kind of take over, and there's a lot of merit for that, don't get me wrong, but I also think that there is merit for having games like this, where the mechanisms aren't overcomplicated and they aren't intimidating. My first pro for the game is quite simply hidden movement has always been an enjoyable thing for me. I enjoy the puzzle of trying to outthink my opponent. Now, that doesn't mean I'm good at it. I just enjoy it. So there's that. And this game has just enough hidden movement to where it's not overwhelming, because the size of the board is not large. So the fact that it's hidden movement isn't an overwhelming thing. It's like, well, goodness, where do I start? You know, some boards are huge, and they have hidden movement, and you're like, well, you could be anywhere. Well, in this game, the board is such that I have an idea of where you could be at any given moment in time. The fact that the Admiral's Graf Spee has to show itself when it has successfully searched for one of those freighters is another thing that makes the hidden movement much more approachable, if I can use that word, because at certain points throughout the game, you're going to know where the Admiral Graf Spee was. Not necessarily where it is, but you're going to know where it was, and that helps you narrow down where you're going to head for, where you're going to possibly search in the next couple of turns. So it made the hidden movement approachable and not overwhelming. That's what I liked about the hidden movement. My second pro for the game is that the artwork is cool. I like the artwork. Now, it's not my favorite artwork. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to overstate this, but it is good enough for me for it to be a pro. I've always said, and I will continue to say, that good games that look good are more fun to play. And that's definitely what's going on here. I also like how the layout of the cards, the graphic design of the cards, really helps with gameplay. And on top of all of that, you also have some neat scenery that are at the top of the card. And I like all of that. So the artwork helped me enjoy the game more than something else might have detracted from it. So I think Albert Montes did a great job, just as he did in Resist, for the same reason. I was drawn to that game. I'm usually not drawn to solo games, but the artwork opened me up to that. And so I did appreciate the artwork in this game very much. My third pro for the game are the fact that the cards are dual use. I really enjoy games that have components that you can use them for this or you can use them for that. I really enjoy that mechanism. It gives, it kind of injects a little bit more fun into the decision making that the game offers you. And I really enjoy that. Do I use it for the action points? I get a lot of action points. I can get a lot done. Or, man, that event would be really useful for me right now. Or I can see where it's going to be useful for me in the future or in the near future. So I'm going to hold back on playing those action points and maybe just go with 4 or 3 action points this turn. I like that kind of decision-making process that you have to go through in games like this. So the dual-purpose cards for me were a great thing. My fourth pro for the game is that, and I kind of already alluded to this, but it's that the gameplay isn't over-complicated. Often when you have war-themed conflict games like this, the tendency seems to be that we want to overcomplicate the mechanisms and make it a little bit hard to get into for somebody that's maybe new to the hobby. Especially hidden movement games. Hidden movement games are really hard for some people to understand off the bat when they're just getting into the hobby. But the simple mechanisms, the small board, I think are all things that work together to make the gameplay super not complicated, very approachable, and not intimidating. And that's why it's a pro for me for this game. I don't always have to have simple games. I like some of the meatier games, but I also don't like games that are just too simple. So this one was challenging, it was rewarding, but it wasn't overcomplicated, and that's why it's a pro. My last pro of the game is going to be simply this. All of the cards had sleeves for them, and that came in the box. You didn't have to pay extra for them, and that's a huge thing for it because these cards are going to be handled a lot. So I like that from the publisher that they decided to put sleeves in the box because they knew that you were going to be handling the cards more often than you would some other game that you might want to put sleeves on cards. I don't usually put sleeves on many cards, but a game like this where you're handling the cards frequently, yeah, I want to put sleeves on them. So I was super surprised and I was super happy to find that the game actually came with sleeves. So that's another pro. Now, my only con for the game is that luck of the draw does come into play in this game. Now, I don't want to overstate this either. I don't think it's a huge deal because the gameplay is so simple and so fun and so rewarding. But if the German player gets caught with a hand of cards that are all lower action points, and the British player just happens to find them at the right time when they don't have it, that can be a pretty much a bummer because at that point, especially if they've used more than one force to locate the Admiral Graf Spee, you're pretty much done, and now you just basically have to go through the minutia of turning over 5 cards and knowing that you're about to be toasted on every single one of them. There is another game ender that I didn't mention earlier, but I should mention now. If the British player plays a specific card, I think it's the Montevideo card, and the German player also happens to play their Montevideo card in the 5th card of the final battle, then the German player wins. But I didn't mention it earlier because the odds of that happening, I think, are pretty stinking low. I never had that. As a matter of fact, the games that I played, we actually talked about it. Oh, if I happen to play this card at that specific moment in time, then I win. Yeah, well, I'm not going to play my card in that specific situation, you know, so it's just one of those things. But luck of the draw does kind of play into it a little bit, but the decks are so small It really shouldn't sway you too much, but I just wanted to mention it as a con because it is there, as with most card games anyway, but I felt like I should at least mention it. I don't think it's a huge deal, and I definitely don't think it's going to be a game breaker at any way, shape, or form. I just think I wanted to mention it because it is there. You might experience it a little bit, but that's the only con I have for the game. So with that having been said, my rating for the game, and I have to be, I have to kind of step out of my normal zone. Over on the flip side, we only do thumbs up. So I guess I'll go ahead and give this 2 thumbs up, but because I'm here on the Dice Tower, I do need to give it a numerical rating. I'll give it an 8.5. An 8.5 for The Hunt. I really enjoyed this game. My wife really enjoyed the game as well. And I think it's going to be one of those games that just stays in our collection for the foreseeable future, because I can, if I have, so I can take it to a game night, and if I have just a couple people out, I feel confident that I'd be able to sit them both down, teach them how to play within about 5-10 minutes or so, and they would be able to take off and have a great time. So kudos to Matthias, Kramer, and Engin, Kunter, and 25th Century Games for hitting this one out of the park. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you guys and gals on the flip side. Take care.